names of consequence and for household names if you know the players. And we didn't have a lot of household names, even though we had amazing players back then and have amazing players beyond Caitlin and Angel. So rivalries are generally good for sports. In women's sports,
The golden goose just said no, and the fallout is absolute chaos. While the entire sports world sat back expecting Caitlin Clark to sign on the dotted line for the biggest off-season venture in women's basketball history, she reportedly walked away without a second thought. And now, WNBA Commissioner Kathy Engelbert has effectively confirmed what everyone feared. The atmosphere behind the scenes is downright toxic. Phoenix Mercury star Sophie Cunningham is reportedly leading a wave of furious veterans who aren't just disappointed. They're livid, because this isn't about a rookie needing rest. This is about money, respect, and a power struggle that's threatening to tear the league apart from the inside out. Rivalries have always been the heartbeat of sports. They create legends, they build household names, and they put eyes on screens. In women's basketball, rivalries can be complicated, but they're undeniably good for business. The problem is, what happens when the rivalry stops being about competition on the court and starts becoming a full-blown civil war off of it? That's exactly where we are right now. And it all starts with one name, Caitlin Clark. Everyone assumed it was a done deal. Project B, better known as the Unrivaled League, was supposed to be the answer to everything wrong with the WNBA's salary structure. Founded by superstars Breanna Stewart and Nafisa Collier, this 3-on-3 off-season league was built with one singular business model in mind: leverage the explosion of women's basketball's popularity to finally pay players what they actually deserve. The marketing, the funding, the projected revenue, all of it was implicitly tied to one name, Caitlin Clark. Investors didn't pour millions into this project just to watch regular season role players run up and down a half court in Miami. They wanted the Clark effect, the ratings spike, the social media buzz, the sold-out arenas. They wanted her. But then the unthinkable happened. Reports started surfacing that Clark wasn't interested. Instead of grinding through the winter months in Miami, helping her peers secure generational wealth, she's reportedly stepping away. She wants to focus on her mental health. She wants to breathe. And according to insiders, she's pursuing a completely different passion: golf. Yes, golf. For a rookie to turn down what is rumored to be a $1 million opportunity, plus equity in the league, is unheard of in women's basketball history. Most players have to pack their bags and fly halfway across the world to Russia, Turkey, or China just to make ends meet during the off-season. They play year-round, risking injury, exhaustion, and burnout just to keep the lights on. But Caitlin Clark, she has the luxury to simply say, "I'm good." And that decision didn't just hurt the organizers. It sent shockwaves through locker rooms across the league, especially in Phoenix. This is where the anger stems from. This is where Sophie Cunningham enters the picture. Because here's the cold, hard truth. If Clark doesn't play, the viewership for this project drops like a rock. We've seen the numbers. When Caitlin Clark is on the court, ratings triple. When she sits, they normalize. Less eyes mean less sponsorship dollars. And less sponsorship dollars means smaller paychecks for everyone else involved. For players who have been clawing and fighting for higher pay, better travel conditions, and basic equity for over a decade, seeing the league's most popular players shrug off a massive payday feels like a slap in the face. It's not just a personal decision anymore. In the eyes of the veterans, this is a business betrayal. Enter Sophie Cunningham. If you've been watching the games this season, you know she doesn't back down from anyone. She doesn't hide how she feels. Cunningham has built a reputation as one of the league's toughest enforcers. She's the villain the WNBA needs, and she plays the role to perfection. but reports suggest her current frustration goes way beyond competitive fire. Cunningham is furious because Clark's rejection highlights a massive double standard that's been simmering all season long. Cunningham is the type of player who scraps for every loose ball, dives on the hardwood, and fights for every single minute of playing time. She has had to grind for every dollar she's earned in this league. So when the rumor mill started turning, her camp reportedly views Clark's rejection of Project B as the ultimate sign of entitlement. While veterans are desperate to grow the game and secure the bag, the perception is that Clark feels she's bigger than the very projects designed to help the league survive. But this tension didn't come out of nowhere. To understand why Cunningham is so angry, we have to rewind to the regular season. The sparks were flying. The Phoenix Mercury and Indiana Fever had battles that felt less like basketball games and more like gladiatorial combat. Cunningham and Clark had several viral moments where the physicality went way beyond what you'd call a normal basketball play. There were hard shoulders, stare downs, trash talk that the cameras barely caught, but the microphones definitely picked up. In one specific instance that went viral, Cunningham was seen practically guarding Clark in the parking lot, physical from the inbound all the way to the rim. At the time, analysts called it playoff intensity in a regular season game. But looking back now, it was clearly personal. Cunningham represents the old guard, the players who feel like they have to welcome rookies with bruises just to prove the WNBA isn't some playground league. Now, that Clark is messing with the off-season money. That on-court beef is turning into legitimate off-court resentment. Here's the context that makes all of this even messier. The WNBA has always prided itself on being a sisterhood, a league where players fought together for scraps, for respect, for recognition. But Caitlin Clark's arrival shattered that unity. Suddenly, there were haves and have-nots. Clark was flying on private charters, while other teams were stuck waiting in commercial security lines. Clark signed a $28 million Nike deal, while MVPs were making $200,000. Project B was supposed to be the equalizer. It was supposed to be the place where everyone got paid, where the rising tide lifted all boats. But by opting out, Clark essentially removed that rising tide, leaving the other ships stranded in shallow water. Sophie Cunningham, who has been vocal about the physicality and the reality of the WNBA grind, sees this as Clark taking all the benefits of the league's explosive growth without putting in the extra work to sustain it for everyone else. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. Usually, the league office tries to sweep this kind of drama under the rug. They pretend everyone's one big, happy family. They brush off jealousy narratives as fan-made conspiracies cooked up on Twitter. Not this time. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert has been making the media rounds, and her tone has shifted dramatically. She recently admitted that the rivalries and the intense narratives are what's actually driving the business right now. She's essentially confirming that the friction is real. In a controversial interview, Engelbert even compared the Clark versus the league dynamic to the historic Bird versus Magic rivalry. She acknowledged that the relationship between the veterans and the rookie is complicated and filled with competitive tension. When the commissioner stops denying the rumors and starts using them as marketing points, you know the situation behind closed doors is volatile. Engelbert knows that Clark's rejection has created a massive headache that the league office now has to manage. She needs Clark to be the face of the league, but she also needs to keep the peace with veterans like Cunningham, who are arguably the backbone of the culture. At the core of this issue isn't just basketball. It's survival. It's equity. For years, WNBA players complained about low pay and lack of exposure. They begged for cameras. They begged for investment. Now, the exposure is finally here, but the person responsible for bringing it, Caitlin Clark, is deciding she needs a break. That's created a crystal clear narrative of us versus her. Veterans feel like they're doing all the heavy lifting to keep the league professional, initiating new leagues, securing funding, organizing the logistics, while Clark gets to pick and choose when she wants to be the savior. Cunningham's reported anger is the voice of an entire locker room that feels disrespected. They believe that if you're the face of the league, you don't get to take days off, especially when everyone else's paycheck depends on your presence. It's the burden of the crown, and they feel like Clark is flat out refusing to wear it. Let's talk about the money again, because that's what truly drives this animosity. The Unrivaled League is promising the highest average salaries in women's professional sports history. We're talking six-figure checks for a few weeks of work in Miami, ownership stakes, equity that could pay out for decades. But here's the thing about valuations. They're based on media rights deals, and media rights deals are based on projected viewership. Without Caitlin Clark, the projected viewership for Unrivaled gets slashed. That means the valuation takes a hit, and that means the equity that players like Sophie Cunningham would receive becomes worth significantly less. In a very literal sense, Caitlin Clark's decision to play golf instead of basketball this winter is taking money directly out of Sophie Cunningham's pocket. When you look at it that way, the anger makes perfect sense. This isn't just hate. This is financial frustration. And then there's the golf rumor, which is the cherry on top of the frustration sundae for the veterans. It's one thing if Clark was injured. It's one thing if she was physically unable to perform. But reports indicate that Clark is obsessed with golf and wants to spend her off-season working on her swing, possibly even competing in pro-am tournaments. To a grinder like Cunningham, who lives and breathes basketball, the idea that the league's so-called savior would rather be on a putting green than on the hardwood is insulting. It feeds the narrative that Clark treats the WNBA like a part-time gig or a stepping stone, whereas the veterans treat it as their entire life. The optics of Clark posting Instagram stories from some lush golf course while her peers are sweating it out in the gym, trying to build Project B, is going to be an absolute PR nightmare for the league and pure fuel for Cunningham's fire. We also have to consider the protection angle. Throughout the entire season, there was a massive outcry from Clark's fan base that the league wasn't doing enough to protect her from hard fouls. Sophie Cunningham was often cited as one of the main aggressors. The veterans argued back that rookies get roughed up. That's just the game. Now, by skipping the off-season league, Clark is effectively removing herself from the line of fire. She's avoiding the physicality. She's avoiding the target on her back. Critics, and likely Cunningham herself, might see this as running away from the challenge. If you want to be the greatest, you have to play against the best year-round. By opting out, Clark leaves the question unanswered. Can she really dominate when the veterans are fully rested and laser-focused in a 3-on-3 matchup? We won't know because she won't be there. Commissioner Engelbert's recent comments about the dark side of the fandom also play into this perfectly. She mentioned how toxic the social media discourse has become. But what she didn't say, and what everyone knows, is that the players read those comments. Sophie Cunningham knows she's viewed as a villain by the Clark stans. She knows that every time she so much as touches Clark on the court, she gets flooded with thousands of hate comments. This external pressure is cooking the internal pressure. Veterans feel besieged by a fan base that only cares about one player. So when that one player turns her back on the collective project, it validates every negative feeling the veterans have been harboring all season long. It feels like the fans are worshiping a false idol who doesn't actually care about the league's long-term survival. There's also the Angel Reese factor. Reese, Clark's historic rival, has already committed to Unrivaled. She's locked in. She's ready to play. By joining Project B, Reese is signaling that she's for the culture, that she's here to work, and that she supports the veterans. This puts Clark in an even more isolated position. It allows players like Cunningham to point directly at Reese and say, "See, she gets it. She's grinding. Why aren't you?" It creates a perfect storm where Clark becomes the outlier, the one who thinks she's too good for the rest, while Reese and Cunningham are down in the trenches together. This alignment of Clark's biggest rivals against her decision creates a powerful block of opposition within the league. Let's dig deeper into Project B's structure. This league was founded by Breanna Stewart and Nafisa Collier, two of the most respected players in the entire world. They put their own reputations on the line to secure investors. They sold a vision of the future. When Clark rejects that vision, she's not just turning down some generic league. She's rejecting the work of Stewart and Collier. She's essentially saying their project isn't worth her time. Sophie Cunningham, who respects the hierarchy of the league and looks up to legends like Stewart, likely sees this as a massive disrespect to the people who paved the way. It's a violation of the unwritten code. You support the ones who came before you. By leaving Stewart and Collier hanging, Clark is alienating the most powerful voices in every locker room across the league. The media fallout has been absolutely relentless. Stephen A. Smith, Cheryl Swoops, every major sports talking head has weighed in. The narrative is spinning completely out of control. Some are defending Clark, saying she played more minutes than anyone else over the last 12 months between Iowa and Indiana, and she deserves a break. They argue she's human, not a content machine. But the other side, the side Cunningham seems to align with, argues that to whom much is given, much is expected. You don't get a $28 million Nike shoe deal and then take a sabbatical when the league needs you most. You don't get to be the face of the revolution and then clock out at 5 p.m. Commissioner Engelbert knows that this offseason was supposed to be the momentum sustainer. The WNBA has a long history of losing casual fans during the break between seasons. Project B was supposed to be the bridge to keep the hype alive. Without Clark, that bridge is shaky at best. Engelbert is now scrambling to find ways to keep the excitement going without the main character. This puts even more pressure on players like Cunningham, Diana Taurasi, and Brittany Griner to sell the league, to do more media appearances, to be more controversial just to keep the headlines moving. It forces the veterans to work harder to cover the deficit left by Clark's absence. And nobody likes doing extra work because someone else called out sick. What does this mean for next season? If you thought the physical play was intense this year, just wait. The rejection of Project B has effectively painted a giant bullseye on Caitlin Clark's back for year 2. Every single player who lost out on potential equity or a higher salary because the Unrivaled valuation dipped is going to remember that when they see Clark driving to the lane, Sophie Cunningham, who's already known for her physicality, is going to have even more fuel in the tank. The screens will be harder. The fouls will be sharper. The trash talk will be more personal. Clark isn't just an opponent anymore. She's the person who messed with their retirement funds. That's a dangerous dynamic to have in a full contact sport. The silence from Clark's camp has been deafening. They haven't issued a long explanation. They haven't tried to appease the veterans. They simply said no and moved on. This lack of engagement is being perceived as pure arrogance. It reinforces the idea that Clark lives in a bubble protected by her agents and her sponsors, completely detached from the reality of the WNBA grind. Sophie Cunningham doesn't have that luxury. She has to engage. She has to answer the tough questions. She has to live in the reality of the league every single day. This disconnect between the bubble star and the grinder veterans is exactly what Commissioner Engelbert is so worried about. It's a culture clash that can't be solved with a press release or a carefully worded apology. As we look toward the future, we have to ask ourselves, is this the beginning of a permanent rift? Will the WNBA become a league defined by Caitlin versus everyone else? It certainly looks that way. The veterans are circling the wagons. They're building their own ecosystem in Unrivaled, one that Clark is not a part of. They're bonding over the shared experience of the grind, while Clark isolates herself on a golf course somewhere. Sophie Cunningham is leading this charge, not just as an enforcer on the court, but as a voice for the frustrated majority. She's representing every player who feels overlooked and undervalued in the Caitlin Clark era. In the end, this story is about so much more than basketball. It's about the growing pains of a league that exploded way too fast. It's about the friction between the old way of doing things, collective sacrifice, grinding overseas sisterhood, and the new way, individual branding, massive endorsements, and the power to say no. Caitlin Clark represents the new power structure. Sophie Cunningham represents the old guard fighting desperately to maintain respect. And Commissioner Kathy Engelbert is stuck right in the middle, trying to keep the train on the tracks while the engine is clearly overheating. So here's the million-dollar question. Is Caitlin Clark being smart by protecting her body and her mental health? Or did she just declare all-out war on the veterans by messing with their money? Sophie Cunningham and the rest of the league seem to think it's the latter. The rejection of Project B proves that while Clark might be the most popular player, she is far from the most popular person in the locker room. As this off-season heats up, this divide is only going to get wider. The golf course might be peaceful for now, but the storm is absolutely brewing back on the hardwood.